The coffee mug slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the kitchen tile, as Brian's words hit me like a physical blow. "We need you out, Mom. Chelsea's pregnant and stressed, and frankly, you're making things worse just by being here." My name is Dorothy Mitchell. I'm 71 years old, and my own son just threw me out of the house I helped him buy. 6 months ago, I'd sold my beautiful 3-bedroom home on Elm Street, the house his father and I had built together over 30 years, to give Brian and Chelsea the $40,000 they needed for their down payment. "It's temporary, Mom." He'd promised his arm around my shoulders as we stood in their driveway. "Just until we get settled." Settled. What a joke. I'd been living in their converted garage ever since paying them $600 a month in rent, while cooking their meals, doing their laundry, and tiptoeing around Chelsea's increasingly hostile moods. The garage smelled like motor oil, and mildew had no proper insulation, and the single window barely opened. But I'd made it work, because family helps family. Chelsea emerged from the living room, her phone still clutched in her manicured hand. She was 7 months pregnant, and glowing with that special kind of cruelty that comes from knowing you hold all the power. "I told Brian weeks ago that having you here wasn't working," she announced, not even bothering to look at me. "I need peace and quiet for the baby, not some useless old woman shuffling around making noise all the time." Useless old woman. The words carved themselves into my chest. "Where exactly am I supposed to go?" I asked, proud that my voice remained steady. Brian shifted uncomfortably, running his hands through his thinning hair. "There are senior communities, Mom. Nice places where you can meet people your own age. We looked into a few. You looked into places to dump me." "Don't be dramatic," Chelsea snapped. "You'll be happier with people in your situation." My situation, code for poor, old, and inconvenient. I stared at these two people I'd sacrificed everything for. Brian, who'd never held a steady job until he was 35. Chelsea, who'd maxed out 3 credit cards, buying baby furniture before they even got pregnant. I'd raised Brian alone after his father died, worked 2 jobs to put him through community college, given him everything I had. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll be out by Sunday." Relief flooded Brian's face so openly it made my stomach turn. Chelsea actually smiled, a small, satisfied smirk that told me everything I needed to know about who she really was when she thought she was winning. But here's what neither of them knew about useless old women we've been underestimated our entire lives. Which means we've learned to keep our most important cards hidden. And I had cards they'd never even imagined. "I'll need 3 days to arrange movers." I continued watching their faces carefully. "Will that work for your timeline?" "Of course, Mom," Brian said, relief making him generous. "Take whatever time you need." Whatever time I needed. How thoughtful. That evening, while they celebrated their victory with takeout Thai food in the dining room, I wasn't invited to join. I sat in my garage prison and made a phone call. "Hudson Properties, this is Sarah Chen speaking." "Hello, Sarah. This is Dorothy Mitchell. We spoke last week about the property assessment position." "Mrs. Mitchell, yes. Mr. Hudson was very impressed with your neighborhood knowledge. Are you still interested in consulting work?" I smiled, watching through the small window as Brian and Chelsea clinked wine glasses, well, Brian's wine and Chelsea's sparkling cider. "Very interested, and I think I've found the perfect property for Mr. Hudson's development project." "Wonderful. Can you tell me about it?" "Seed 1247 Maple Street. The owners are young, financially overextended, and the property has some interesting code compliance issues that would make it perfect for renovation or teardown." Sarah's voice perked up with interest. "Code issues. Unpermitted garage conversion, The kind of thing that would require expensive remediation if the city ever decided to inspect. I paused, letting that sink in. The current owners seem overwhelmed by homeownership responsibilities. They might welcome an opportunity to sell quickly. That sounds exactly like what Mr. Hudson looks for. When can you show him the property? I watched Brian help Chelsea up from her chair, his hand gentle on her back, the same back he'd turned on me earlier today. How about Thursday morning? I happen to know the owners will be home. After hanging up, I pulled out the manila folder I'd been keeping in my nightstand drawer. Inside were 6 weeks' worth of correspondence with the city planning office contractor estimates and permit applications, all the paperwork for bringing the garage conversion up to code. Work I'd arranged to have done as a surprise, my moving out gift to the kids who'd never quite appreciated what their mother could accomplish when properly motivated. The garage conversion Brian's friend, Dave, had done without permits. The same conversion that would cost $8,000 to bring into compliance once the city's infrastructure development project required neighborhood code inspections. Development project that Brian and Chelsea had never heard about because they'd never read the official notices. Notices that had been mailed to the previous homeowner and forwarded to me as the down payment contributor on their mortgage application. But what my ungrateful family didn't know was that I'd been in contact with Will Hudson for 3 weeks, ever since I'd learned about his interest in neighborhood revitalization projects. A man with vision resources and very specific ideas about property acquisition in up-and-coming areas. Thursday morning, I would introduce Will Hudson to 1247 Maple Street. I would watch Brian's face when he realized exactly who his mother's new employer was. And then we'd all learn together what happens when you throw away someone who's been protecting you from consequences you never saw coming. I folded the city notices back into their folder and slipped them into my suitcase. Some gifts were best given with perfect timing. In the main house, I could hear Chelsea laughing at something on television. The sound grated against my nerves, like fingernails on chalkboard. Soon enough, she'd learn that pregnancy hormones were no excuse for cruelty, and that some old women bite back. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my navy blazer, the one I'd worn to Harold's funeral 2 years ago. Professional, authoritative, but not intimidating. Perfect for my new career in property consulting. Will Hudson was exactly what I'd expected from our phone conversations. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of confident handshake that closed million-dollar deals before lunch. We met at Starbucks, 3 blocks from Brian's house, and I watched him review property listings on his tablet while I stirred honey into my coffee. Mrs. Mitchell, I have to say, your knowledge of this neighborhood is exactly what I need, he said, scrolling through photos of comparable sales. Property values here are about to explode once our infrastructure improvements begin. Infrastructure improvements. Will's eyes lit up. The city approved our development proposal last month. New sewage systems, updated electrical grids, fiber optic cables throughout the area. It's a $20 million project that will triple property values within 2 years. My coffee suddenly tasted better. And homeowners who can't afford the new tax assessments will find themselves with some difficult decisions to make, he finished diplomatically. Which is why we prefer to make generous cash offers before the construction begins. Gives everyone options. I nodded thoughtfully. About 1247 Maple Street, the owners are first-time buyers, young parents. From what I observed during my time there, they're living paycheck to paycheck despite decent incomes. Financial pressure makes people pragmatic about unexpected opportunities. Will agreed, making notes. You mentioned code compliance issues. The garage has been converted to living space without proper permits. I doubt the work meets current safety standards. I paused, choosing my words carefully. The male owner seems to believe shortcuts are acceptable if nobody's watching. Will nodded approvingly. Perfect. Cash offers tend to look very attractive when people realize the alternative is extensive legal and construction costs. An hour later, I found myself walking up Brian's driveway, beside Will Hudson clipboard, in hand, playing the role of professional property consultant. Through the kitchen window, I could see Chelsea's shocked face as she spotted us approaching. Brian answered the door in his work clothes, looking like he'd been up all night with pregnancy anxiety. His eyes took a moment to focus, then widened in complete confusion when he recognized me standing next to a strange man in an expensive suit. Mom? The word came out like a question, as if he wasn't quite sure his eyes were working properly. Will stepped forward, smoothly, business card extended. Mr. Mitchell, Will Hudson Properties. This is Dorothy, my property assessment consultant. We'd like to discuss a business proposition. I watched my son's brain try to process what he was seeing. His mother, who'd been living in his garage 3 days ago, now stood on his doorstep in professional attire with a property developer. The confusion on his face was almost comical. "May we come in?" Will asked pleasantly. "I think you'll find our proposal very interesting." Chelsea appeared behind Brian, one hand on her rounded belly, her face cycling through surprise, confusion, and dawning suspicion. "What's going on? What's she doing here?" "Dorothy works for my company now," Will explained with professional courtesy. "She's been invaluable in helping us identify properties suitable for our development projects." The word development hit them like cold water. Brian's mouth opened and closed without sound. Chelsea grabbed his arm hard enough to leave marks. "Perhaps we should sit down," I suggested kindly. "Mr. Hudson has some information you'll want to hear." They led us into their living room, the same room where Chelsea had called me useless just 4 days ago. I settled into the chair I'd never been invited to use when I lived here, smoothing my skirt, while Will spread papers across their coffee table. "I'll cut straight to the point," Will began. "I'm prepared to offer you $450,000 cash for this property with closing in 30 days. Chelsea gasped audibly. They'd paid $380,000 just 18 months ago with my help. "That's very generous," Brian stammered. "But we're not looking to sell." "I understand." Will nodded sympathetically. "However, I should mention that we've identified this entire block for comprehensive redevelopment. The city has approved our infrastructure improvement plan, new utilities road, widening updated drainage systems. Construction will begin in 6 weeks." I watched their faces as the implications sank in. Construction meant months of noise dust, blocked driveways, and general chaos. Property values during construction would plummet before they eventually skyrocketed. "Of course," Will continued conversationally, "there's also the matter of code compliance. Our preliminary assessment suggests several properties in this area may have unpermitted modifications that will need to be addressed before construction can begin." Brian's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "What kind of modifications?" "Garage conversions mostly. If we discover unpermitted work during our permit application process, city inspectors will require full compliance reviews of all neighboring properties. The costs can be substantial." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Chelsea's hand moved protectively to her belly. "How long would we have to decide?" she asked, her voice smaller than I'd heard it since the pregnancy began. Will consulted his calendar. "Well, Construction begins in 6 weeks. After that, living conditions will be quite challenging for pregnant mothers and new babies. But the offer stands until Monday. That gave them exactly 4 days to figure out how to come up with $8,000 for code compliance or accept his offer and walk away with a $70,000 profit. "I'll leave my card," Will said, standing gracefully. "Dorothy can answer any questions about the development timeline." Standing on their front porch, I allowed myself one small moment of satisfaction, watching Brian's face cycle through panic confusion and dawning realization. "Take care, you two," I said warmly. "I hope everything works out for the best." My phone started ringing before I'd reached Will's car. Brian's number flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then Chelsea called. Voicemail. Then Brian again. Then Chelsea. Then Brian. "Popular lady," Will observed with amusement. "Family," I replied simply. The 5th time Brian called, I was back in my new apartment, a cozy 1-bedroom downtown that I'd secured with my first week's consulting paycheck, and I decided to answer. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" His voice cracked with panic. "Language, Brian. And I thought we established that your problems aren't my concern anymore. This isn't a game. That man is talking about tearing up our entire neighborhood. Mr. Hudson is talking about improving it," I corrected gently. "Property values in the area will increase significantly. That's wonderful news for homeowners who want to sell." "We don't want to sell, we just bought this house. With my money," I reminded him. $40,000 of my retirement savings, to be exact. Money I'll never see again, apparently. The line went quiet. "Mom, I know we hurt you." "Hurt me?" I laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. "Brian, you made a calculated decision to throw me away the moment I became inconvenient. That's not hurt, that's betrayal. Chelsea was emotional. The pregnancy hormones. Don't you dare blame this on pregnancy hormones." My voice turned sharp as broken glass. "Chelsea showed me exactly who she is, and you chose to support her instead of your mother. That's fine. You're adults. But actions have consequences." Another long silence. "So what is this revenge? You're trying to force us out of our home?" I sighed, suddenly, feeling very tired. Brian the city identified this area for development months ago. Will Hudson was evaluating properties in this neighborhood, with or without my input. I simply provided accurate information about the kinds of issues he looks for in acquisition targets. "You could have warned us. Like you warned me before deciding I was useless." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. "What do you want from us?" he asked finally. "I don't want anything from you anymore," I said, and realized I meant it completely. I wanted respect. I wanted to be treated like family instead of hired help. But it's too late for that now. "Mom, please. Chelsea's pregnant. We need stability." Chelsea should have thought about stability before she decided to bite the hand that was feeding her. I hung up before he could respond, feeling lighter than I had in months. Act 3. The counteroffensive. 20-30 minutes. 1550 words. An hour after I hung up on Brian, someone was pounding on my apartment door, like the building was on fire. Through the peephole, I saw Chelsea mascara streaking down her cheeks, her face blotchy, with tears and desperation. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Please," she said, without preamble, her voice raw. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was stressed about the baby, and I took it out on you. But this is insane. You can't destroy our lives because I said something mean." Something mean. I leaned against my doorframe, studying her like she was a particularly interesting specimen. 6 months ago, this woman had systematically excluded me from family dinners, holiday planning, even conversations in my own son's house. She'd made it crystal clear I was unwelcome, unwanted, and unnecessary. Is that what you call it? I asked quietly. Something mean. I was wrong. She wailed, her hands clutching her belly. I admit it, but we're family. No, I said, my voice deadly calm. Family doesn't throw each other away when they become inconvenient. You made sure I understood I wasn't family. I'm just the woman who helped you buy your house. We'll pay you back with what money you're living paycheck to paycheck, and you're about to have a baby. Even if you wanted to pay me back, you couldn't. Her face crumpled completely, tears flowing freely now. What do you want? How do we fix this? The question I'd been waiting for. The one that would determine whether this story had any chance of a different ending. You want to know how to fix this? I stepped closer, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You can't. Some bells can't be unrung, sweetheart. Her face cycled through emotions, desperation, anger, fear, and finally, something that looked like understanding. So that's it, she said, her voice hardening. You're going to ruin us because your feelings got hurt. My feelings got hurt, I repeated slowly. Chelsea, you called me useless to my face and convinced my son to throw me out of his house after I gave you $40,000. You repaid my sacrifice by treating me like a burden you couldn't wait to discard. I said I was sorry. You said you were sorry because you need something from me. There's a difference. I watched her process this, her hand moving protectively to her belly. For just a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Look, I continued, Will Hudson's offer is more than fair. You'll make money on the sale, and you can buy something better in a different neighborhood. We don't want a different neighborhood. We want our house. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to alienate the one person who was protecting you from exactly this situation. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. What do you mean protecting us? I smiled, and it wasn't entirely kind. Honey, do you think it was an accident that Will Hudson contacted you this week? Do you think it's a coincidence that he suddenly became interested in your specific street? Right after I moved out, the color drained from her face as understanding dawned. You planned this, she whispered. I planned to protect my family, I corrected. Right up until the moment my family made it clear they didn't want my protection. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and went even paler. Brian's coming over. Good. It's time we all had an honest conversation. 10 minutes later, Brian burst through my door like his hair was on fire. Mom, we need to talk. Chelsea said you admitted you set this whole thing up. I admitted no such thing, I said, calmly pouring myself a cup of tea with steady hands. I explained that I've been consulting with Mr. Hudson about neighborhood development opportunities. Your property happened to be of interest to him. That's the same thing. No, Brian, it's not. Setting it up would imply I created the problem. I simply stopped preventing it. He stared at me, confusion written across his face like graffiti. What does that even mean? I walked to my kitchen and pulled out the manila folder I'd been keeping in my drawer. Inside were documents I'd hoped I'd never have to show them, but hope was a luxury I could no longer afford. 6 weeks ago, I began. The city sent notice that your block was being evaluated for infrastructure improvement. They needed to verify that all properties were up to code before approving development permits. I handed Brian the first document, watching his face go white as he read. We never got this, he said weakly, because it was sent to the previous owners who forwarded it to their real estate agent, who contacted me since I was listed as the down payment contributor on your mortgage application. Chelsea grabbed the paper from Brian's trembling hands. You've had this for 6 weeks and never told us. I've been handling it for 6 weeks, I corrected. Do you remember when I asked about the garage conversion permits back in February? When I offered to help you get the paperwork sorted out. Brian's mouth fell open. You said it was routine maintenance stuff. Because I didn't want you to worry during Chelsea's difficult pregnancy. I was working with a contractor friend to get everything brought up to code quietly. It would have cost about $8,000 and taken 2 weeks. The silence in my small apartment was deafening. Chelsea found her voice first. But you never did the work. I smiled sadly. That was going to be my moving out gift to you. Everything properly permitted, up to code, ready for the city inspection. I had it all arranged for this week. Brian sank onto my couch like his strings had been cut. After we kicked you out, after you made your priorities clear, I said gently, I called the contractor and canceled. Will Hudson was always coming, Brian. The development was always happening. I was just going to make sure you were ready for it. The weight of what they'd thrown away settled over them like a heavy blanket. Chelsea started crying again, but this time it was the quiet, hopeless kind of crying that comes with real understanding. Can you still fix it? Brian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at my son, my baby boy, who'd grown up to break his mother's heart, and felt something crack inside my chest one final time. The contractor's already committed to another job, I said softly, and Mr. Hudson's timeline doesn't allow for delays. What if we found someone else paid rush fees? I pulled out another document from my folder. This is an estimate from 3 other contractors. $18,000 for rush work due to current construction demand in the area. Chelsea made a sound like a wounded animal. We don't have $18,000. I know. Could you loan it to us? Brian asked desperately. I stared at him for a long moment. You want me to give you $18,000 after you threw me out of your house for being useless? It's not give its loan. Brian. My voice cut through his desperation like a blade. You haven't paid me back the $40,000 you already owe me. You're about to have a baby. Your expenses are going to triple, and you want me to loan you more money. The truth of it hung in the air like smoke. So that's it? Chelsea asked bitterly. You're really going to watch us lose everything. I'm going to watch you experience the consequences of your choices. I corrected. There's a difference. Brian stood up abruptly. This is insane, Mom. We're family. We were family when I needed support after losing my home. We were family when I needed basic respect and kindness. But you made it clear that family was conditional on my usefulness. I met his eyes steadily. Now you know how that feels. As they left defeated and finally understanding the true cost of their cruelty, I couldn't help but think that sometimes the most important lessons are the ones that hurt the most to learn. But I wasn't done yet. Phase 2 of Will Hudson's development plan was about to begin, and Brian and Chelsea were going to discover that their problems were just getting started. The next morning brought 3 missed calls from Brian and a text from Chelsea that simply said, "Please." I deleted the text and made myself coffee, settling in to watch the quiet drama unfold exactly as I'd orchestrated. By noon, Will Hudson called with an update that made me smile into my teacup. Dorothy, I wanted to let you know the Mitchell property owners requested an emergency meeting. They're asking about payment plans for the code compliance work. I stirred honey into my tea, savoring the irony. Payment plans? Apparently, they can't afford the $18,000 for permits and renovations up front. They want to know if we'd consider partial payments over 6 months. And your response? I told them the construction timeline doesn't allow for extended payment schedules. The city needs compliance verification in 2 weeks, or the entire block gets red tagged during development. Perfect. What did they say to that? The young man got quite emotional, started talking about family obligations and people who should help family in crisis. Will's tone was carefully neutral, but I caught the underlying question. Family helps family, Mr. Hudson. I replied smoothly, but only when the relationship is mutual. These particular family members made their position quite clear regarding mutual obligations. I see. Well, they've asked for the weekend to make a final decision. After hanging up, I walked to my window and looked out at the city I'd called home for 40 years. Such a beautiful autumn day. Perfect weather for new beginnings. My phone buzzed with another text from Brian. Mom, we need to talk face to face. Please. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, You had 6 months to talk face to face. You chose not to. The response came immediately. I'm coming over. I won't be home. I replied, though I was perfectly home and planned to stay that way. 20 minutes later, someone was knocking on my door, then pounding. Mom, I know you're in there. Your car's in the parking lot. I turned up the television and continued reading my book. The pounding became more desperate, then finally stopped. Through my peephole, I watched Brian slide down the hallway wall to sit on the floor outside my door. He stayed there for 4 hours. When he finally left, he slipped a piece of paper under my door. I waited 10 minutes before picking it up. Mom, I know I can't undo what we did. I know sorry isn't enough. But Chelsea's scared about the baby, and we don't have anywhere else to turn. You're the strongest person I know. You always fix things. Please fix this. Brian, the strongest person he knew. Funny how strength looked different when you actually needed it, versus when it was just convenient to have around. I folded the note and put it in my drawer, with all the other things I decided to keep, but never look at again. Friday arrived with unseasonable rain, the kind of steady downpour that makes everything look gray and defeated. I was organizing my bookshelf when my phone rang. Unknown number. Dorothy Mitchell speaking. This is Patricia Hayes, Brian Mitchell's mortgage officer at First National. I'm calling because your son listed you as an emergency contact, and we have a situation. I sat down carefully. What kind of situation? Mr. Mitchell called requesting to add a home equity line of credit to cover unexpected expenses. However, our property assessment flagged some issues that need resolution before we can approve additional lending. What kind of issues? Unpermitted modifications to the structure. Our appraiser noted that the garage has been converted to living space without proper documentation. For us to proceed, the property needs to be brought into code compliance. I almost smiled. The mortgage company had discovered the garage issue independently. Perfect timing. I see. And why are you calling me? Your son seemed to think you might be able to help with the compliance costs. He mentioned you had experience with home renovation projects. Brian had told his mortgage company I was going to pay for the repairs. Not asked, me assumed it. Ms. Hayes, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not currently in a position to assist with this project. Long pause. Mr. Mitchell was very insistent that you'd already committed to helping. Mr. Mitchell was mistaken. After hanging up my phone, immediately rang again. Brian this time. Mom Patricia Hayes said you refused to help with the permits. I didn't refuse anything. I corrected her misunderstanding about my involvement. You told me you had it all arranged. The $8,000, the contractor, everything. I had it arranged when I lived in your house and considered myself part of your family. That arrangement died when you threw me out. This is insane. You're destroying us over hurt feelings. Something snapped inside me, like a rubber band pulled too tight. Hurt feelings. My voice turned deadly quiet. Brian, do you have any idea what you put me through? I sold my house, my home, to help you buy yours. I lived in a garage and paid you rent. I cooked your meals, cleaned your house, and tried to stay invisible while your wife treated me like dirt. Mom, I'm not finished. When I needed support, after losing everything, You made me feel like a burden. When I needed family, you chose your wife's comfort over your mother's dignity. And now, when you need something, suddenly, I'm family again." The line was quiet for so long, I thought he'd hung up. "What do you want from us?" he asked, finally his voice small and broken. "I want you to solve your own problems for once in your life." Saturday morning brought unexpected visitors. Through my peephole, I saw Chelsea's parents, Frank and Linda Morrison. I hadn't seen them since the wedding, but I opened the door, genuinely curious. "Frank, Linda, what brings you by?" Linda looked uncomfortable, but Frank got straight to the point. "Dorothy, we need to talk about this situation with Brian and Chelsea." I invited them in, made coffee, and listened as they explained that Chelsea had called them in tears, begging for money to fix permit problems with their house. "She's 8 months pregnant," Linda said. "The stress isn't good for her or the baby." Frank leaned forward. "Dorothy, we know there was some kind of family disagreement, but surely we can work this out. We're all adults here." "What exactly did Chelsea tell you happened?" They exchanged glances. "She said you moved out after an argument about privacy, that you were upset about not being included in baby planning." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Is that all?" "She mentioned you were hurt, that they wanted to use the garage for the nursery instead of having you live there permanently." So Chelsea's version had me as an oversensitive old woman who couldn't handle reasonable boundaries. "Frank, Linda, let me tell you what actually happened." I walked to my kitchen drawer and pulled out the folder with the city notices. Over the next hour, I laid out the entire timeline, the code violations, my arrangements to fix them, the costs I was prepared to cover, and the exact words Chelsea had used when she kicked me out. Linda's face went pale as I spoke. Frank's jaw tightened visibly. "She called you useless," Linda whispered. "Among other things." Frank stood up abruptly. "That little we raised her better than that." "I'm sure you did, but people change when they get comfortable taking advantage of kindness." "Dorothy," Linda said carefully, "what would it take to fix this? Not just the house situation, but the family situation." It was a fair question from people who genuinely seemed to care about doing right. "Linda, some things can't be fixed. Chelsea showed me who she really is when she thought it was safe to do so. Brian chose to support her rather than defend his mother. Those are character reveals, not momentary lapses." Frank nodded grimly. "So what happens now?" "Now, they deal with the consequences of their choices, just like everyone else does. They'll sell the house to Will, Hudson make a profit, and find somewhere else to live. Chelsea will learn that actions have consequences, and Brian will learn that his mother isn't a bottomless well of unconditional support." As they prepared to leave, Frank turned back. "For what it's worth, Dorothy, you're handling this exactly right. We'll be having a serious conversation with our daughter." But as the door closed behind them, I realized something had shifted inside my chest. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely at peace with my decision. Monday morning would bring Will Hudson's final offer, and Brian and Chelsea would have to make their choice. Either way, I'd won something more valuable than revenge. I'd won my self-respect back. Monday morning brought a phone call that changed everything one final time. "Dorothy, this is Will Hudson. We have a problem." I set down my crossword puzzle, dread pooling in my stomach. "What kind of problem?" "I just received a call from city planning. Someone filed a formal complaint about our development project, claiming we're using intimidation tactics to force residents out of their homes." My blood went cold. "Who filed the complaint?" "Frank Morrison. Apparently he's some kind of retired city council member with connections." "Chelsea's father. I should have seen this coming." "Well, I can explain. Dorothy, the city is launching an investigation. They want to interview everyone involved in property acquisition for this project. That includes you. I closed my eyes. What kind of investigation? They're looking into whether Hudson Properties used unethical practices to pressure homeowners into selling. If they find evidence of intimidation or coercion, the entire development could be shut down. And my involvement? You're listed as a property consultant who provided inside information about specific addresses. They'll want to know how you identified the Mitchell property and what your relationship is to the owners. After Will hung up, I sat very still for a long time, wondering if I'd finally pushed too hard. Within 2 hours, my phone rang again. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the City Planning Compliance Office. We'd like to schedule an interview regarding your consulting work with Hudson Properties. Of course. When would be convenient? Today, if possible. This is time sensitive. The interview took place in a sterile conference room at City Hall. Detective Chen was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes, and the kind of quiet intensity that probably made suspects confess things they'd never intended to admit. Mrs. Mitchell, can you explain your relationship with Hudson Properties? I explained about my job as a property consultant, my knowledge of the neighborhood, and my role in identifying development opportunities, and your relationship to Brian and Chelsea Mitchell at 1247 Maple Street. Brian is my son. Chelsea is his wife. Detective Chen's pen stopped moving. You recommended your son's property for acquisition. I identified it as a property that would benefit from Mr. Hudson's improvement project. Yes. After being asked to move out of that same property, so they knew. Of course they knew. Detective, are you familiar with the city code violations at 1247 Maple Street? She consulted her files. Unpermitted garage conversion. Yes. I spent 6 weeks trying to help my son resolve those violations. I arranged contractors secured permits and was prepared to pay for all compliance work. This was before Hudson Properties was involved. But you didn't complete that work. I was asked to leave the property before the work could begin. And then you contacted Hudson Properties. This was the moment of truth. No, detective. Hudson Properties contacted me about consulting opportunities. They were developing the area with or without my input. I simply provided accurate information about property conditions. Detective Chen studied me for a long moment. Mrs. Mitchell, some people might see your actions as revenge against your son. I met her gaze steadily. Detective, some people might see my son's actions as elder financial abuse. I provided Mr. Hudson with factual information about code violations that were already documented by the city. If that helped him make informed business decisions, I consider that good consulting work. The interview lasted 3 more hours. When it was over, Detective Chen walked me to the door. Mrs. Mitchell, off-the-record family disputes like this rarely end well for anyone. Detective off the record, sometimes people need to learn that actions have consequences, even when those people are family. 3 days later, Will Hudson called, with news that would change everything one final time. Dorothy, the investigation is closed. I gripped the phone tighter. And no fraud, no coercion, no unethical practices. The city found that all our development procedures were legitimate, and your consulting work was entirely appropriate. Relief flooded through me like warm honey. What about the complaint? Withdrawn. Frank Morrison called this morning and apologized for wasting the city's time. Apparently, he had some enlightening conversations with his daughter. That afternoon, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Brian and Chelsea, both looking like they'd aged 10 years in the past week. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. Mom, Brian said quietly, we owe you an apology. Several apologies. Chelsea added her voice, barely above a whisper. I waited. My parents told us what really happened. Chelsea continued. How you tried to protect us. How you were fixing everything. And her voice broke. We threw it all away. Brian finished. We threw you away. I looked at my son, really looked at him. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, and looked genuinely devastated. "Yes," I said simply, "you did. Can you forgive us?" Chelsea asked. It was the question I'd been dreading, because I wasn't sure of the answer. "I can forgive you," I said finally, "but I can't forget what you showed me about who you really are when you think it's safe to be cruel." "We want to make it right," Brian said desperately. They looked at each other, then back at me, helpless. "We don't know," Chelsea admitted. "We don't know how to fix what we broke." "You can't fix it," I said gently, "but you can learn from it." "Does that mean, is there any chance we can be family again?" I considered the question seriously. These two people had shown me their worst selves, but they were also showing me genuine remorse. "Maybe," I said finally, "but it would be a different kind of family, one based on mutual respect instead of convenience, one where my value isn't measured by my usefulness." Hope flickered in Brian's eyes. "We can do that." "Can you, because Chelsea, the next time you're stressed about something, are you going to take it out on me? And Brian, the next time you have to choose between your wife's comfort and your mother's dignity, which will you choose?" They both started to answer, then stopped, understanding that these weren't rhetorical questions. "Think about it," I said. "Really think about it. And when you have honest answers, call me." 2 weeks later, they sold the house to Will Hudson for $450,000. After paying off their mortgage and closing costs, they walked away with $60,000 profit, enough for a down payment on a smaller house in a different neighborhood, a house they could actually afford without anyone's help. Chelsea had the baby a month later, a healthy girl they named Dorothy. When Brian called to tell me, his voice was thick with emotion. "We wanted to honor you, Mom, if you'll let us." It took 6 months before we had dinner together again, not because I was punishing them, but because it took that long for us to figure out how to be family members instead of user and used. Today, 2 years later, we have a relationship that's smaller, but infinitely stronger. Chelsea treats me with genuine respect because she learned what happens when she doesn't. Brian makes his own decisions because he learned that his mother won't always be there to fix his mistakes. And me, I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people experience the consequences of their choices. I'm 73 now, living in a beautiful apartment I chose for myself, working part-time as a property consultant because I actually enjoy it. Little Dorothy, my granddaughter, just took her first steps, reaching for me across her high chair while calling Gamma in that sweet baby voice that makes my heart sing. She'll grow up in a family that learned how to value each other properly. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be anyone's victim ever again and teaching the people who hurt you to be better than they were. That's worth more than any apology could ever be. If you're dealing with family members who take you for granted, remember you teach people how to treat you. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stop accepting the unacceptable. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.